London, the capital of the United Kingdom, is renowned for its rich history and an economy valued at over $500 billion. The city has long been a global financial hub, known for its high-value services and attractive salaries. However, this wealth masks a growing crisis. By 2023, the city has seen a 50% increase in homelessness over the past decade, with more than 1 in 50 residents affected. Real wages have stagnated for over 15 years, while the cost of living, especially housing, has soared. These challenges are prompting an unprecedented exodus from the UK. A junior professional in New York can earn nearly double what they would do in London despite a higher cost of living. This disparity has driven many young British professionals, especially those in the National Health Service, to seek better opportunities abroad due to low pay and challenging working conditions. Interestingly, as Britons leave, immigration to the UK continues to rise, creating a complex labour market dynamic. The UK has long been a magnet for immigrants thanks to its esteemed education system. However, a 2015 study reveals a troubling trend. Those leaving the UK are often more highly skilled than those arriving. This skill has led to a rise in the proportion of lower-skilled workers, potentially hampering productivity and diluting the quality of goods and services in the economy. Despite its apparent wealth, Britain is experiencing a mass exodus of talented young workers due to deteriorating living conditions. Without London, the British standard of living would drop by 14%, comparable to Mississippi, the poorest state in the US. Data suggests the UK's best days are behind it, with the economic situation worsening significantly over the past 15 years. In 2007, UK households were 8% worse off than their Northwest European counterparts. Today, the gap is 20%. If trends continue, Slovenian and Polish households will surpass British households. This situation disproportionately affects lower-income individuals, and the UK, needing immigrant labour, may soon have to offer lower wages to newcomers. In the UK, the highest earners enjoy a high standard of living, ranking 5th in the world, but the average household is 12th, and the poorest 5% of 15th. Last year, the standard of living of the lowest-income UK households was 20% lower than that of their Slovenian counterparts. This paradox occurs because although more people are moving to the UK, public services and the pool of skilled workers are shrinking. Let's look at why one of the richest countries in the world is facing this situation and why many want to leave. Not so long ago, Britain was a prosperous and attractive destination for young, skilled talent. Many Britons shared this sentiment, with 60% of them considering that life was better in the 1990s and 2000s. This era, remembered with nostalgia, was marked by the global success of British music from groups such as Oasis and the Spice Girls and the Cool Britannia movement. The end of the Cold War also contributed to a global optimism. Although people tend to romanticize the past, the 1990s was actually a period of economic success for Britain. Despite a difficult start with the ERM crisis and a recession, the country entered an era of remarkable economic resilience. From 1992 onwards, Britain experienced its longest period of uninterrupted growth since World War II, known as the Long Expansion. This growth was driven by structural reforms, effective monetary policies, and favorable global conditions, highlighted by continued GDP growth and productivity improvements. The financial sector was key, with credit expansion, especially in real estate lending, boosting consumption and investment. Regulatory reforms attracted investment, maintaining a positive net foreign income balance. However, the shift to a service-based employment model did not adequately replace jobs lost in heavy industry and mining, affecting the country's poorest areas. In the mid-2000s, problems began to emerge, and the 2008 financial crisis exposed the over-reliance on financial services and the lack of investment in other vital sectors of the British economy model. If you liked what you saw, please like the video. It would be a reward for us. And now let's move on. Today, the UK grapples with significant challenges, including an overstretched National Health Service, a housing affordability crisis, and aging infrastructure. The housing shortage is particularly acute, driven by restrictive zoning laws, limited public housing finding, and economic priorities that have sidelined residential construction. This has made home ownership increasingly unattainable for many, especially first-time buyers without substantial incomes or family support. Over the decades, the lack of sufficient housing construction has created a significant imbalance between supply and demand in the housing market. This problem has its roots in past policy. In the 1970s, the Right to Buy scheme allowed social housing tenants to buy their homes at a discount. Although this policy offered ownership to those who previously could not afford it, it also reduced the number of social housing units by around 25%, while the population continued to grow. The lack of social housing has driven more people to private renting, increasing demand and rental prices due to insufficient supply. The lack of social housing has led many people to turn to private renting, increasing demand and rental prices due to insufficient supply. Rising rental costs have hit those with lower incomes the hardest, severely limiting their housing options and forcing them to compete for affordable accommodations. Over the past 30 years, housing prices have risen significantly faster than real wages, widening the gap between homeowners and non-owners. Housing shortages are a particularly acute problem in the UK, with 1.4 million fewer households in social housing since 1980. This has led to increased overcrowding in the private and social sector, increasing the likelihood of homelessness for many, although this is not always visible to the general public. The number of English households in temporary accommodation has more than doubled between 2010 and 2023, reaching the highest figure on record. Conditions are precarious, with common damp, mold, and pests affecting job and educational stability. This decreases social mobility and increases cost for councils, which spent nearly £1.8 billion on emergency accommodation last year. The situation is due to the housing shortage, the decline in social housing, and the lack of financial support for market rents. Young people are particularly hard hit by these housing market problems. Many older people own a second home, while young adults are less likely to own and more likely to rent. This shift reflects broader economic trends, where stagnant wages contrast with rising asset values, exacerbating wealth disparities. Slowing economic growth also limits opportunities for career advancement, affecting earnings in the early stages of working life. In the UK, the expectations of earning more than parents has declined, with those born in the 1980s earning less in their 30s than the previous generation. Unable to buy homes and facing lower wages, some British talent is leaving the country in search of better opportunities in places like the United States, Australia, and New Zealand. The stagnation of wages in the UK is largely due to declining productivity, which is the efficiency in the production of goods and services. Since the 2008 financial crisis, productivity growth has stagnated, with a significant decline in investment. UK companies have invested 20% less than their counterparts in other countries, leading to obsolete technologies, lower innovation, and skill development deficits. This has affected the efficiency and innovativeness of the UK's economy, contributing to stagnating productivity and thus wages. The UK National Health Service, established in 1948 as a free, publicity-funded healthcare service, has been central to British life for more than 70 years. However, over the past 2 decades, costs have risen and the quality of treatment has declined. This is partly due to population growth and aging, which has increased the demand for health services. Despite tax increases, public services like the NHS are facing greater difficulties than ever before. The number of people waiting for treatment in the NHS has more than doubled since 2004, reaching 7.4 million. Despite significant increases in NHS funding and staffing since 2019, data shows that patients treated for serious health problems have lower survival rates compared to other developed countries. Although NHS funding has increased by 11% in real terms since 2019-20, and the number of doctors and nurses has risen, problems persist in the quality of the health service. What is the problem? Despite more funding and personnel, the SNS is facing rising costs due to several factors. The aging population requires more medical care, new technologies and medical treatments are expensive, drug prices are rising, and people expect higher quality care. In addition, paying higher salaries to staff also increases costs. These rising costs, known as healthcare inflation, make it difficult for the NHS to improve services and outcomes even with more resources. This poses a problem, as providing a good level of care to an increasingly aging population requires investment in the long-term future of services, but there is currently no money for this. Although funding has increased, it is used to cover the costs of maintaining the service, which have soared in the last decade, meaning that there is hardly any money left to invest in the long-term capacity of the NHS, and money must be redirected to cover day-by-day operational costs. This lack of investment in the NHS is part of a wider pattern of inadequate infrastructure spending across the UK. Sectors such as transport and utilities also suffer from underfunding, leading to inefficiencies and reduced service quality. Hence, there is a pressing need for strategic review of the UK's approach to infrastructure funding and planning. In addition, new projects are much more difficult and expensive to build than in other countries. This is better demonstrated nowhere than by HS2, a proposed high-speed rail network to better connect the north and south of England. Ignoring that such rail networks already exist, the project was conceived in 2009, took 11 more years to start construction in 2020, and by then proposed construction costs had soared from £37 billion to over £100 billion. It was abandoned in 2023. One major issue exacerbating many of the UK's existing problems is Brexit. The effects of Brexit are multifaceted and can fill an entire video on their own. The decision by British citizens to leave the European Union in 2016 has undoubtedly worsened the UK's situation, primarily due to reduced trade with the EU, its main trading partner. However, Brexit is not the sole reason for the UK's economic decline, as many of the difficulties the UK face are also present in other European economies, albeit to a lesser extent. The UK's current brain drain crisis is due to various factors, including the desire for new opportunities and a higher quality of life. Returning to the country's favourite decade, the focus on immediate economic gains during the 1990s was often at the expense of long-term planning and investment in infrastructure. While privatisation was supposed to bring in capital to improve infrastructure, in many cases it led to underinvestment as private companies sought to maximise profits rather than reinvest in long-term improvements. And now the UK is paying the price, and even with the general election coming up, it doesn't look like things will improve for several years.